Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mars Narani, and I am the Digital Communications Specialist with the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Welcome to our panel session for Western Pride Month. We are so excited to welcome our panelists and our moderator to Western. Before we begin with their introductions, I would like to make you aware of some resources available to attendees. The closed captions have been enabled. You can access the captions by hitting the CC button in your control bar. The chat function has been disabled for this event. If you have a question, please submit it to the Q&A tab in your control options, and we will review them at the end. Lastly, we understand the complexity and the sensitivity of the topic of the panel discussion today. We want to let all attendees know that we have a zero tolerance policy for any hateful comments in the Q&A. Anyone spreading hateful messages in the Q&A will be removed from the session immediately, and further action may be taken if necessary. Now I will pass it over to Leslie Oliver, the EDI specialist at the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, for a special land acknowledgement.
Hello, everyone. We acknowledge that Western University is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Chinootan nations, on lands connected with the London Township and Sombra Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. With this, we respect the long-standing relationships that Indigenous nations have to this land, as they are the original caretakers. We acknowledge historical and ongoing injustices that Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit endure in Canada. And we accept responsibility as a public institution to contribute towards revealing and correcting miseducation, as well as renewing respectful relationships with Indigenous communities through our teaching, research, and community service. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie, for a wonderful land acknowledgement. Finally, we would like to remind students, staff, and faculty members at Western to complete the Western Equity Census. Beginning in October of 2021, the Western Equity Census is the first ever comprehensive demographic survey for all staff, students, and faculty, which will help us understand the demographics of the university, enhance the support of diversity and equity of our community. The census, which is voluntary and confidential, takes less than 5 minutes to complete. It is available through My Human Resources for employees and Student Center for students. Now, I would like to provide a short introduction of our panelists and moderator for today's event. Our first panelist is Rabbi Seth Gorin. Originally from Philadelphia, Seth lives in Toronto and is Hillel's Ontario Chief Executive Officer, as well as a PhD student at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education of the University of Toronto. After earning a BA and MA in linguistics from the University of Pennsylvania and teaching English in the Czech Republic, Seth received his JD from the University of Pennsylvania Law School and practiced human rights, commercial, and consumer protection law. His commitment to the interfaith community, to LGBTQ, 2SIA+, advocacy, and Jewish communal work led him to Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religions, Rabbinical School, as a Wexler Graduate Fellow. He served previously as the Executive Director of Repair the World, Philadelphia, and as the Director of Jewish Student Life and Associate Chaplain at Lang University, where he also taught courses on interfaith dialogue and Jewish law. Seth is an avid Bruce Springsteen fan and tea aficionado, an eager and avid crossword puzzler, and a proud father of an 11-year-old. Our second panelist is Pastor Sandy Thomas. On top of being a mother of 2 and grandmother of 4, Pastor Thomas currently is the senior pastor of Spiritual Blessing Lighthouse Ministries here in London, Ontario, and a church to serve her community in the Black Creek and Thranthwaite area of Toronto. She sits on the current boards, Internet Sense First, the CDIS Community Diversity, Inclusion, Anti-Racism, and Anti-Oppression Panel for the City of London, the Anti-Racism Panel for the London Police Service, and the Anti-Racism Panel for the London Middlesex Health Unit. Also, she is involved as an advisor and mentor for many Black businesses in Canadian Black Chamber of Commerce. She has co-authored a book with 12 other pastors called A Collection of Sermons, Volume 1. She is an award-winning film documentary where this film received over 12 awards, and to name 2 awards, Indie Fest and the Toronto Independent Film Festival Best Canadian Documentary, called Vulnerable Innocence. On the panel of early childhood or for the London Catholic School Board, helped to pilot the London Black Public Library in collaboration with LPL, and she is the Director of Public Relations for the Congress of Black Women London chapter. Our final panelist is Imam Abid Al-Fatah Takal. Imam Takal was born and raised in Calgary, Canada. He holds a BA Honors in Religious Studies, a BSc in Zoology, and a Master's degree in Islamic Studies. Imam Takal has been engaged for several years in many aspects of interfaith dialogue, the media, youth, family counseling, and outreach. He lives in London, Ontario, where he served as the Imam of the London Muslim Mosque for 4 years and its Director of Community Outreach and Engagement until June of 2018. He currently serves as a volunteer Muslim chaplain for the London Police Service, the RCMP-O Division, the Elgin Middlesex Detention Center, and the London Health Sciences Center. Imam Takal is also one of the founding members of the London Council of Imams, established in 2022. Since August of 2018, he has been working full-time at a non-religious social service family support group agency, the Muslim Resource Center for Social Support and Integration in London, serving as their intercultural community relations coordinator. Today, he is representing himself as a teacher and resident scholar of the Al-Ghazali Center in London, Ontario, and founding member of the London Council of Imams. Lastly, our moderator for today's panel, Dr. Brian Caruana, also known as the Religions Geek, is the Executive Director of Encounter World Religions. He worked in strategy counseling and venture capital before discovering a passion exploring ethno-religious communities. For 20 years, he has studied innumerable traditions, fostered relationships with religious leaders and community, and taken thousands of people annually to houses of worship. Brian has been invited to speak in a range of work environments through North America and healthcare to high tech. From policing to municipal governments. He speaks on religious diversity, on understanding what religion is, and offers #Beyond Diversity talks that actually educate staff about different traditions to religious literacy in a workplace and make religiously committed staff feel seen and valued. Brian has a PhD in religion from the University of Toronto. On behalf of the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at Western, we welcome everyone. Now I pass it on to Brian to moderate today's talk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mars. And thank you all for being here for this important topic. As you see, we have 3 panelists representing different faith traditions. We obviously couldn't have someone representing every faith tradition, but we've tried to get an array of folks, and we hope that a lot of the lessons will be transferable to whatever faith community some of you might belong to. For folks of religious identities who also have queer identities, there is a risk almost of a kind of double marginalization. Sometimes there is a marginalization within the faith community with a kind of unacceptance that can happen. But sometimes too, there can be a marginalization within queer spaces. Not always, but some queer spaces can be quite secular, and some would say even at times anti-religious, finding religions as doctrines being sort of persecutorial. And so for someone who has both those ideas, both those identities, you can find yourself in a very uncomfortable, potentially uncomfortable space. And that's what we want to talk about today. Just to set the ground, the point of this panel today is not to have religious debate, to get into doctrines and text interpretations. Today's panel is about support. What unites our panelists is a belief that people of these identities and every identity have dignity. And as people with dignity, they should be supported. And so that's what we're talking about today. With that, let me begin with my first question, and I'll give it to all three of you. Sandy, maybe I'll ask you to jump in first, if you would. My first question is about challenges. What challenges do 2SLGBTQIA plus people experience within faith communities?
To be honest, I'm going to say that a lot of times the challenges that they face is the acceptance, coming in and feeling if a space that they belong, to feel love, looks, that are challenging when they come into a space that's supposed to be accepting of everyone. And many times it's not necessarily that way.
Thank you. Thanks, Pastor. Rabbi or Imam, would either of you like to jump in? Sure, Rabbi.
Thanks. So I think that there's, as Pastor Sandy was saying, that there's often kind of hostility kind of within communities, and that there's challenge. And I think that kind of when it's difficult to feel someone's love for you and someone's acceptance for you when they actually don't feel it for you even to begin with. I would say what's often layered on top of that is that, speaking from both personal experience, as an openly gay man and kind of conversations with other queer folk, is that there also are a lot of wounds that many of us carry given our past negative experiences. And so I think that we often kind of can be re-traumatized when we're coming into religious spaces, even if those spaces are in fact welcoming. And then on top of that, I think that there can be kind of a certain degree of kind of internalized like queerphobia, homophobia, transphobia. And so that sometimes many people who carry both queer and religious identities can start to believe these things, which makes it difficult, even if there is kind of a welcoming and accepting and celebrating community, to even summon up the courage to enter the community, to physically come into the space and to encounter people.
Yeah, thanks very much. That idea of baggage and wounds is very relevant. Imam Abdel Fattah.
Yeah, Bismillah. So I think one of the challenges faced, as was mentioned at the beginning in the introduction, is a very complex issue. It is not a simplistic or superficial matter. And I think, when I speak, of course, I'm going to be speaking just in terms of within the Islamic context and within the experiences that I've seen personally within our community. Often enough, there's a lack of nuance when it comes to being able to address this issue. As Muslims and within the Islamic faith tradition, Muslims are a diverse community, but at the same time, the Islamic faith tradition does have principles, guiding principles, and guidelines when it comes to morality and ethics and whatnot. And I think that the lack of nuance when trying to address this issue, where people, they see it as like an all or none type of thing, what happens is that the sense of compassion for the humanity of individuals who are struggling and who have had negative experiences, that becomes overlooked. And that ends up resulting in further marginalization of individuals, rather than being able to engage them to say, okay, well, we understand there's a struggle that's happening here. And sometimes people, they live in a paradox, literally. I mean, from within, looking at what Islam says about this, and then the experiences of individuals, that they're almost living a life of paradox. And so individuals don't feel that there's any form of support because of that lack of nuance. And so even we have to define, when we're talking about support, what exactly does that entail? And I think that this is also going to be a part of our conversation today.
Thank you. Thanks, Imam. Well, if we open talking about challenges, let's flip the script and talk about benefits. Rabbi, maybe I'll start with you. What benefits do you think that 2SLGBTQIA plus people can experience within faith communities? If there are these challenges, what is the pull? What benefits might they get?
Sure. I think that there often is this kind of sense of the spiritual benefits, just from kind of feeling like a closer connection with, whether it's with the community, for people who are, believe in God, like the idea of kind of like a divine connection or a sense of holiness, can be incredibly important. I think that there also is this sense of being able to integrate all of who you are into one person, as opposed to feeling like, okay, I have this part of myself which I acknowledge and kind of celebrate over here, and I have this other part of me, and I can't bring the two of them together. So I think there's a sense of being able to live as a whole, or an integrated person living a holistic life is a significant benefit.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Imam, could I ask you, and Imam, I don't know if it's possible for you to get closer to your microphone. You were just a little hard to hear the first time.
Is this better?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, perhaps I can try to speak a little bit louder as well.
Sure.
I think when it comes to benefits, as human beings, we're spiritual creatures within our own nature. And this is speaking about the matter from within an Islamic perspective, and also from an Abrahamic faith tradition. Human beings are spiritual creatures in and of themselves, and so what opportunities are available for individuals who are struggling to be able to explore the different aspects within themselves, that how do they for example deal with the paradoxes that they might be experiencing? How are they able to navigate that? And because at the end of the day, when we're talking about some of the impacts that people and experiences that they go through that lead to, for example, mental health issues and a lack of compassion in terms of being able to deal with people at a human level, right? Spiritual spaces are meant to be able to kind of address that, but at the same time, without necessarily compromising the fundamental or foundational principles of the respective faith traditions. And I think that's part of the challenge or the difficulty when we're having these types of conversations is again, it's that there's that lack of nuance. And so part of the benefit is to be able to engage individuals where they're able to kind of think about these types of things within themselves, and to be able to understand that okay, they have their experiences, but at the same time they're able to have a sense of spiritual fulfillment, which is necessary for people. It's part of their innate nature, that you can actually have those spiritual experiences that don't necessarily compromise the faith principles and within the Islamic tradition, which are clear and foundational.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, I hear you both talking about this, this filling of a need, and that need maybe is even made more acute by the marginalization that can happen, right? If one needs that sort of spiritual fulfillment, how much more so does one need it when one is experiencing that kind of marginalization? How much more does it mean? Pastor Thomas, over to you.
I was waiting to get in on this. I love this. The most benefit that an individual can have, doesn't matter about gender or race, the most benefit is feeling that acceptance, that space that is non-judgmental. And when you can feel that, then your wellness, everything else is okay. And so when you know that you have a leader from that organization, from that faith base that is demonstrating that, that is the benefit. Because you know that that leader does not judge you and is accepting you, then you're able to be relaxed, feel comfortable. And what better benefit is that than to, instead of trying to survive, you're living now. And so that's the most benefit of all, is now you're getting that way, that source of living, not just being, but living.
Thank you. Imam, let me turn to you to start the next question. We were just talking about sort of the ideal, right? What could be, what the spiritual, belonging to a spiritual community can add. But now I want to go to kind of the practical level. How do you think that 2SLGBTQIA plus people feel about their sense of belonging within your community? And I'll ask that to all three of you, and I'll just start with you, Imam. How do you think people in your community with these identities feel about their sense of belonging?
So it depends on the environment that they're in, and where it is that they go if they end up going to seek out support. So even when we're talking about support, we have to be clear of how, at least from within the Islamic faith tradition, what do we mean by when we're talking about support? This means we're looking at things from a human rights perspective, meaning that an individual as a human being has the right not to be discriminated against, not to have hatred incited against them, not to experience various forms of violence against them. But at the same time, we understand, I mean, from the Islamic faith tradition, there is a moral, ethical definition when it comes to issues related to sexuality, when it comes to gender. These things are clearly defined within the Islamic faith tradition. And so when it comes to individuals and the space that they feel that they can occupy, if they feel that the environment is hostile towards them, that won't even allow them to have a conversation, to engage, where they're able to explore these aspects from themselves and to be able to understand things from various perspectives. I mean, I'll give you an example. When we're talking about the Islamic faith tradition, the primary moral characteristic trait of Islam is modesty. And so even discussing or talking about, sexuality, I mean, the reality of it is that there's a history in terms of where we are today. And when we live in a society that, that it's quite hypersexualized in terms of, how these things are discussed, there has been a lot of change. This is a modern, manifestation of based on, what we are in today. And so even from within an Islamic perspective, to be able to speak about these things in the manner in which they're spoken, ideally, it's like, okay, we need to have a sense of modesty. What exactly does that mean? What exactly does that entail to have that sense of modesty? And when we're talking about sexuality, within, for example, like a marital relationship, that's something that is there. There's a balance that is established, but it's not, Muslims in general, whether hetero or homo or whatnot, this is not something that we're very open about talking and expressing publicly, so to speak, to say that, that my identity is based on, my sexuality as a human being. That our identity is much more complex. And so it depends on the type of space that individuals are in. Is there enough room for them to be able to have these types of conversations, to be able to explore what their faith says about, these matters, which are in Islam, at least, they're clearly defined, and how is it that they're able to navigate that within themselves with a level of compassion? Because I think this is our responsibility as faith leaders, is that we understand, yes, our religion is clear when it comes to these moral aspects, but we at the same time, we have to understand the human element. And the common goal for me, when I look at this, is that we all want to be able to achieve a point where we all agree that there should be no form of hatred or discrimination against individuals, regardless of how they identify themselves. That should be a common goal, even though we might differ when it comes to, specifics or particulars, whether it's related to, certain actions or, viewpoints when it comes to ethics and morality. That's open for discussion. And I'm actually glad that we're able to have this conversation today, where I feel that there is a safe enough space to be able to say, well, okay, we don't necessarily have to see eye to eye on absolutely everything, but certain things that we do need to see eye to eye on is when it comes to the human rights perspective. That, to not be, to feel a sense that they're going to be discriminated against or hatred is directed against them, or to incite violence against anyone, regardless of how they identify themselves.
Yeah, thanks, Imam. I hear that point about how the sense of belonging creates the possibility for conversation and connection, and how without that you kind of can't even start. Pastor Thomas, how do you think folks of these identities feel about their sense of belonging within your community?
It's a very, very good question. I know for a fact we have an individual that's transgender, and to hear when they speak and they say that, they've been coming here to Spiritual Blessing Adults Ministries for over a year and a half, and they feel that they found a space that they belong, it speaks volumes for the Black community. The spaces that you want to make sure that we are creating are one of belonging. It is something that I know that individuals within the queer community have had a tough time within our community of finding, but as we move to educate ourselves better and try to understand and not judge these spaces are becoming more and more where individuals are getting that space where they can belong. It is very imperative that we move away from ignorance, get ourselves to understand each other, and create that holistic places where individuals have that safe space, because in the faith community, that's what it's all about. It is about helping people to understand faith. And so within our community, I'm going to say the Black community, we are moving forward and better at understanding and not being judgmental and having these spaces. And I can speak for myself, these safe spaces where people from the 2SLGBTQIA plus community can come in and feel that they belong, because we're all part of the human race. And that's what I want to make sure that people come into these doors. They are getting connected because it is about the human race and that spirit. And so we are, once again, moving and becoming better than where we were 10, 15 years ago. We're moving into spaces where we are not judging, and we are showing, I know for myself, agape love. And when you show agape love, God's love, it's unconditional. And so to answer your question, we're doing better. We're improving. We're improving.
Yeah, that's that's so true. I blog about religions, as Mars mentioned at the beginning, at my Religions Geek site, and it's not infrequent that I end up blogging about the impact of two things on religious communities around the world, and those two things are feminism, the women's rights movement, and the LGBTQ plus movement. Both of them have affected everything from the most conservative to the most religious, the most liberal religious communities. They're just enormously influential movements. Rabbi Seth, can you talk about the sense of belonging that you think people feel within the Jewish community who have these queer identities?
Sure. I'm always very cautious when I speak about kind of the Jewish community, because
Yeah.
there's so much diversity in terms of
There's only one, right? There's only one.
Exactly.
Jewish
There's only one
community.
opinion. Yeah, that's what we're really great at that.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to kind of acknowledge the first that there are different communities that are parts of the Jewish community, and some are I think a little bit more difficult and challenging and even hostile to 2SLGBTQIA plus identity and individuals. But I think that's often, it's easy to stereotype religious settings as being hostile in that way. And so I don't feel a need to focus on those for this conversation. Instead, what I'll focus on is, the majority of Canadian Jews affiliate with or are represented by the conservative, reform, reconstructionist, secular humanist, or just kind of secular Jewish identities and movements. And in those contexts, there still is a good deal of variety. But in all of those movements, 2SLGBTQIA plus individuals are able to be ordained. They're able to have their marriages celebrated and their life cycle events celebrated as part of the religious community. That there is religious language that's developed to acknowledge different modes of gender expression across a gender continuum. And so I think that kind of, at least in principle, the infrastructure is there for a sense of welcoming. It doesn't mean that everyone is welcoming or celebrating all the time. I can attest to the fact that is definitely not true. But that at least kind of, that the rubrics for inclusion and the rubrics for celebration are in place. What I'll also say is, like, just kind of speaking to the organization that I work for. So I work for an organization that does Jewish campus life across 9 campuses in Ontario. We have a cross-campus group called Rainbow Jews, which celebrates and has events for 2SLGBTQIA plus Jews and people who are part of their families or part of their community, that we have training for our staff and for our student leaders in order to figure out how can we make our spaces more welcoming and more celebrating. And so there clearly is still a way to go. I would agree that kind of our direction is positive, but I'd like to think that we're a place that is striving to do well and to do better, and to learn from kind of when we slip up, which we do.
Yeah. No, I hear that progress narrative, and even within the Orthodoxy community, right? There's the modern Orthodoxy community that is often, you know, more to the letter on things like kosher and stuff, but is creating new spaces for this sorts of thing. Okay.
If I could just comment on that just
Yeah,
briefly,
please
I
do.
think that there is, like, I think you're right, even in Orthodox Jewish communities, there's a sense of we have to deal with this. We can't just say like these people don't belong in our community. Like these people have no place. There's a sense of like these are our children, these are our siblings, like these are sometimes our parents. And we have to work with this. Like we can't just say like we want nothing to do with you. And I as someone who's been in conversation with people who are more traditional, I think that there is this sense of like, how do I figure out a balance between what I believe is kind of divine word, which tells me that certain conduct is okay, or certain beliefs or certain behavior is unacceptable, and someone whom I love and care about and who is dear to me. And I think that that's like, I think that that struggle is real. I don't think that it's fake or put on. And so I think that like I come from a place where I feel like I've had enough love and support in my life that it's easy for me to be understanding of people who struggle with that from a religious perspective. I also understand the fact that for some people, this is a really painful topic and that it's hard for them to find that degree of empathy and compassion for what they experience as oppression. So I think it's hard. I think it's
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah, it's an area of so much potential love, right? Love for the person, love of God, love of faith, and then sometimes the conflicts as well. Yeah, yeah. Um, Pastor Thomas, let me return to you. I wonder if you could share, and I'll ask this again to all our panelists, either if you could share a success story, or if you could share a story where things went in a way that if you could go back, maybe you do things differently to support people in the 2SLGBTQIA community.
Absolutely. About maybe I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, there was a young individual that was confused about his identity. And when it was brought to my attention at a very young stage, not understanding and being taught a different way, I wish I had handled it better. The church wanted to turn the individual away, which I didn't want that, but I didn't understand. Um, and so now when I have more understanding and more wisdom, it would have been where instead of saying you need to sit in the back, it would be having that conversation with the individual more and getting more of understanding of how they're feeling, and then going into the community and getting the much needed supports that they needed to help them deal with what they had to deal with. But instead, that individual left the church, and I did try to reach out to the individual. And since then, I've met the individual, spoken with the individual more. Never did I ever tell the individual that what they were feeling was not correct or anything like that, but wanting to maybe give more love and support, which was needed. And so as you grow, you get more mature. And as you grow, you get more understanding. And as you pray, your eyes get opened up spiritually different than I would say that what I was raised with. And myself, because I am a supporter, I get turned away from my community because of that. And that's fine because I know who I am, right? And so going and doing things differently than what I was taught. And I always tell people, a lot of times it's not that you are against something. It's because what you are taught, you continue to go with it until you get the proper teachings that's needed. Then when you get the proper teachings, you're able to make that proper formulated decision for yourself. And now I myself am very proud to be a supporter of the, I'm going to say it, S2LGBTQIA community plus. And I'm able to say that. And you know, people ask me, what if your children come to you and say that? I said, well, I love my children. Why wouldn't I? Right? And so once again, as I grew and as you grow, and that's why I said we can't judge each other because we are raised in different environments. And when you take yourself out of that type of environment and you allow your creator who created you to download into you and to give you revelation that maybe they were not able to give those people at the time, because they were not in that kind of space in order for that to happen, but you've allowed your spirit to be opened up, then you're able now to teach others something that they never knew before. But we have to be in those spaces. And so now I'm able to do that. Teach and listen and learn, because that's what it's all about. We have to teach and listen and learn from each other. So now I'm able to go to that individual and make amends if I have done anything. And then that individual will be like, you know, you're the only person and you came into my home and you prayed with me. I'm good. And that's the most important thing, is that, you know, that individual is good and that you continue to grow and learn from each other.
Yeah, I really appreciate your sharing about, you know, life experiences, how we go through this life, all of us, we encounter peoples, our exploration sometimes of our faith identity continues to nurture, to mature. And yeah, the life is just such an ongoing journey. Imam Abdel Fattah, do you have either a success story that you would like to share, or conversely, do you know of a story where maybe, you know, if you could go back, you wish things could be done differently?
So I think part of one of my own, you know, experiences within the Muslim community is when I'm able to engage an individual that feels safe enough to be able to come to talk to me about their struggle in this regard. For me, that's a success. Why? Is because the idea as a faith leader, and I have to be very clear that, you know, I do abide by, you know, normative Islamic understandings when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to gender norms. I'm very much in the traditional school. And so when I'm able to speak to an individual that is struggling, and to be able to help them to navigate, you know, so when it comes to questions about sexuality, these are clearly defined within Islam. You know, when it comes to sexual matters, the default actually in Islam, unlike everything else, when it comes to sexuality and sexual matters in Islam, the default is that they're actually prohibited. They're prohibited or forbidden unless they're specifically permitted. And that's how Islam defines, you know, those sexual norms. So what is permitted? Islamically, you have sexual relations between a man and a woman bound within the Islamically valid contract of marriage. That's what's permitted. Everything else is considered as prohibited. That's normative Islam. Nobody can come and to try to change that. That's historically speaking the tradition of how it is. Now, when an individual comes to me in order to be able to have a conversation and we're able to help talk about, okay, there is a compassion. I understand that there is a struggle that you're going through. An individual who has same-sex attraction, how does he navigate or she navigate that without compromising their faith principles, right? And that, you know, we have, like in the North American Islamic context, individuals like Wahid Jensen, who this is something that he experiences same-sex attraction. And even when it comes to identity, I mean, you know, there's a difference when a person says, I am gay versus I have same-sex attraction. These are two different statements that are looking at things from a different paradigm, so to speak. And so when you're able to have those types of conversations, just to allow people to think about things from a different perspective, to help them to navigate without compromising normative Islamic faith principles, for me, that is considered as a success story. The fact that they're able to come and to approach, to feel that they're able to have this conversation, but it's not about, you know, making judgments on people. That's not our position. We're not here to make judgment on people, but rather we're here to be able to provide an understanding. This is what normative Islam talks about and says when it comes to Islamic sexual and gender norms and morality, and how it is that we're able to kind of have this difficult, challenging conversation and to be able to support individuals when it comes to navigate. And at the end of the day, individuals make their own choices. I'm not responsible for the choices that they make. But what is my responsibility is to be able to have that conversation without, sugarcoating or without sort of watering things down, to say, this is, these are agreed upon norms that exist within our faith tradition. And so how do you struggle with that? How do you navigate with that? And it is possible. And that's the thing, that you want a success story. It is possible to actually navigate that without compromising one's faith principle, without doing things that would be considered as prohibited, right? The feelings aren't prohibited, but it's the actions that, that there are concerns about. So how do I navigate that where I'm able to, because the feelings are beyond a person's control, but a person, they have control over their actions, and in terms of their, how they identify themselves. What is that identity based on? What, as was one of the, panelists mentioned, the environment that they're raised in, it does have an impact in terms of how we formulate our worldviews and the perspectives that we see. When we look at things from a historical perspective, what's the history behind it? How did we get to the point that we're at? It's important to be able to explore these types of things. And so allowing that opportunity to explore that with an individual who comes and is struggling and feels safe enough to be able to have that conversation, for me, I see that as a success story.
Right, I understand. So for you, a lot of success is the ability that the person can come forward and have the conversation.
Yes, exactly.
Rabbi Seth, can you share with us either a success story or, again, conversely, maybe a situation where something happened and afterwards you thought, boy, I wish I could do that again?
Yeah, so I'm going to share something that I still, to this day, I'm not really sure if it's a success or something I wish I would do differently. Probably
sounds like my whole life.
Yeah, I know. It's like one of those situations like, I don't know if this was the right thing to do, but here it is. So, and if people have thoughts about this, I would welcome people's thoughts. So this is at this point about 20-ish years ago. I was at my aunt and uncle's synagogue. After services, I was talking with a woman who was probably about 20 some odd years older than me. Very friendly, nice conversation. And she just said, are you married? And I said, no. She said, are you in a relationship? And I said, no, I'm not. And she said, can I introduce you to my daughter? And I said, oh, that's really kind of you, but actually I'm gay. And she said, I said, but really, that's very kind of you that you think that I would be good enough for your daughter, that you think that I'm kind of worthy of being a part of your family. So thank you. That's very kind of you. And she said, okay, well, if you change your mind, let me know. And I kind of I was just kind of oh, okay. And so at the time, I think that there's I later found out that actually she kind of felt really bad about how she had responded because and she actually came up to me and she said, I feel, this was several years later actually, and said to me I wish I had responded differently. She said, I just didn't know what to say. I just didn't know how I was supposed to respond. And I think that to the extent that we have, whether it's the spiritual or the emotional energy and strength to give people, I think grace, I think would be the word that I would use, and to give people space to kind of process things and to understand and to think about things. I think that in of itself can be a sign of success. I think that there is that sense of when is this about me and when is it I am representing a larger community? And I think for many of us with marginalized identities, we try and balance that all the time. But I think that I'd like to think of this in the moment. I think I was a little bit I don't know what I'm supposed to say either. And so I definitely looking back, I maybe would have responded a little bit differently. So that's not necessarily successful. But I think that kind of the emotional connection that people can have in terms of offering each other a little bit of understanding when they're messing up. I think that in and of itself is actually a good sign of success and something I'm proud of from that encounter.
Yeah, I love what you say. I honestly think this is something that almost the country should be talking about. We have such a plural country, plural on so many fronts, right? Race, religion, beliefs, and the need for grace to deal with those differences. And as we're all learning, and I just feel like it's such an important and under addressed topic. I thank you for that. Rabbi, if I could come back to you for a particular question, are you able to address the question of, we've been talking a lot about someone who's queer in a religious space. How about for a religious person in a queer space? How can you say anything about how that might sometimes feel?
Yeah, I would say that there are times where I feel a little bit defensive. I find that often kind of when I say like, oh, I'm a rabbi, people's first response is either to share kind of religious trauma they've had from their youth, whether they're Jewish or not, or to say really derogatory things about religion, which are totally like prompted solely by the fact that like what I do for a living, oh, I'm a rabbi. It's, I think that it can be that can be a challenge in queer spaces. I would not say that necessarily the two are equal in terms of the impact that they have. But I also find that people are I think that it was, I'm not sure if it was Pastor Thomas or if it was Imam Takal. I think probably both of you talked about kind of like spiritual needs and kind of inherent spirituality of human beings. And I find that people are often kind of grateful to have someone that they feel like they can have a conversation with, because they're often so turned off from or alienated from religion. So I think that there can be challenges and there can be difficulties, but I think that that just kind of having spiritual resources in areas that are often kind of deprived of them can provide a variety of benefits to the people who are there.
Thank you for that. Pastor Thomas, I wanted to ask you about maybe you and the Imam about the role of compassion. I remember speaking with an organization that pursues the intersection of queerness and religiosity, and they were talking about how compassion, they think, is so central to these conversations. Is there anything you can say about the role for that in these conversations?
It's very important that I'm going to add what Rabbi Seth was saying in regards to grace. We have to have grace and compassion for each other. You're talking about a community, the 2SLGBTQIA plus community, that are struggling in different pots to get accepted. And with that, it brings a mental issue that can happen if we don't start demonstrating some grace, some compassion. It can affect, and it does affect them. And so within our communities, faith-based communities, one thing that we need to make sure that we are demonstrating, not just saying, but demonstrating, is making sure that compassion is there. Grace, we're giving grace to one another. Because if not, I believe it was yourself, Brian, that had said it, it is a journey. It is absolutely a journey. And on this journey, we need to make sure that we are displaying as faith leaders or as people with one another, that we are compassionate. We are showing compassion to one another. In this life, we're going to make mistakes. There's no perfect person here. We're going to make mistakes. It is a journey, but on this journey, we need to demonstrate that compassion for one another, because if not, then what are we doing? What are we doing? We need to give each other grace and give each other that platform that one another we can share and we can start the healing process. And in order to do that, we have to be compassionate. We have to be able to allow people into these spaces, to allow the community into the spaces, so that we can have the much needed dialogue for compassion, have that dialogue and demonstrate compassion so that they can see and have that grace that is sufficient for all of us. Grace is not just here for one or two people. Grace is here for all of us, and we need to understand that. And in order to have grace, we must have compassion. In order to have compassion, we must have love for one another. And so it's at a time where we need to put away our own selfish needs and get into where it's not really about us. It's about helping others. It's about understanding this journey that we're on, and, to let go of pride and to be able to say to one, I'm here for you. Be compassionate. Be at a place where you are going to be able to really hear that individual and now be able to walk alongside of them in this journey, because it's a journey for all of us. And without having that compassion, we have nothing. And so that compassion coupled with that love and that grace, it is phenomenal. It will be phenomenal for us to get to the next levels that we need to get within a community to make sure that the 2SLGBTQIA plus community has that safe space that they belong and continue to be vital individuals and to be able to grow. And so we need to be able to come together. And I'll say this again, we are always divided, in faith. It's denominations. We don't need to be divided with denominations. We're divided in the human race by skin color. We don't need to be divided. Everything is trying to divide us, because divided you fall and united we stand and we rise. And so we need to peel away at all of these things that are dividing us and remember that it's just one thing, and that's the human race. And how can we as faith leaders demonstrate that compassion, demonstrate that love, so we can continue to elevate each other on our journey in this human race. And so I'm very compassionate about this, very passionate about compassion, because we need to have it, and it speaks to integrity, it speaks to inclusiveness, as faith leaders. And so that's all I have to say on that. That's it.
Pastor Thomas, that'd be a great byline for you. I put the passion and compassion. Okay. Just before I turn to the Imam, I wanted to say to all the attendees that we're gonna, right after the Imam's done speaking, I want to turn it over to questions. So if you've been listening, you've got some questions, now would be a good time. You can put them in the Q&A and we'll turn to address them. Imam, almost every surah or chapter of the Quran starts off with that famous introduction in the name of God, Al-Rahman, Al-Rahim, the most gracious and the most compassionate.
Yes.
Can you talk about the role of grace and compassion in these conversations?
No, absolutely. And I really appreciate this understanding and conversation when it comes to compassion. I am going to, kind of look at it from a much broader perspective and to kind of take a step back. When we're looking at the Islamic faith tradition, the word Islam, of course, it means surrender to God. So at the end of the day, the question that we always ask ourselves is, who is this about? And so it's not necessarily about the self. And even when it comes to about others, it's all about, at the end of the day, God. And that's that tapping into that spiritual aspect or element within our existence as human beings. And so within the Islamic faith tradition, God is the most compassionate and the most merciful. And so in our surrender to God, as was mentioned, by Pastor, as human beings, we make mistakes. And so there are things that, are clearly defined within the Islamic faith tradition of, okay, well, what actions are seen as, being acceptable by God and what aren't? And that those exist. We can't deny the existence of, those normative elements that are within the Islamic faith tradition. And how does my surrender to God manifest itself? And so when it comes to compassion, it's not about allowing the compassion to compromise one's faith principles. And that's something that we need to be very clear about. The faith principles and the morality and the ethics and the Islamic sexuality, they're firmly defined. They're very clearly, explicitly, and firmly defined. And so it's not to allow compassion to allow somebody to compromise those principles. It's not about that. But the compassion comes to play where it's just like, okay, how can I live that life as in accordance with those norms defined by God in my surrender to Him? And that if I make a mistake, then I understand my path to God is about that return to Him. It's about that sense of repentance. It's about turning back to God without compromising my own, principles. That if there are things, actions that are good, I follow those actions that are good. If there are actions that are not good, that are considered as problematic or sinful or whatnot, then I avoid those, right? Based on God in terms of the guidance that He has given to us within our faith tradition, within our sacred scriptures. And so that sense of compassion is always there when it comes to turning back to God, when it comes to and allowing that to manifest itself in our day-to-day dealings with one another. And so then if I have an individual within the community that is struggling with this, the compassion aspect is for me, let's have a conversation. The compassion is not going to say to me, you can do sins and it's okay in the sight of God. I can't say that because it's not for me to define what those matters are. Those are clearly defined within our faith tradition, through the sacred scriptures. So it's not for me to come and to say, well, based on compassion, we basically overlook or you can accept actions that are considered or deemed as impermissible. That's not an option. But rather, it's about, okay, how can I allow that individual to feel that sense of compassion from God that will allow them to turn back to Him, that will allow them to be, guided based on these clear defined ethics and sexuality and gender norms within the Islamic faith tradition. And that's the type of conversation where there is indeed a level of compassion that must be there, because that's what ends up happening, where people become marginalized, where they don't see that compassion, they don't sense it, they don't feel that they have a place to turn to where they can get that type of support on that level. Support is not acceptance of deeds that are deemed as impermissible or sinful. That's not what we're talking about here. That's not a part of the equation here, but rather it's about, let's have that conversation where you can feel the compassion of God simply when you turn to Him. If you do something wrong, then rectify yourself, work on it, have that conversation with those who can provide that sense of direction back towards the Almighty. That's what our faith tradition is all about at the end of the day. Who is this about? This is about God, first and foremost, and ultimately at the end of the day, who is the most compassionate, the most merciful. So the question then becomes, how do I manifest those attributes in my dealings with other people, with Muslims, with non-Muslims? How do I manifest that compassion of God on a day-to-day basis without compromising my faith principles?
Thanks, Imam. I want to thank our attendees. We've started to have some questions come in, so please submit those. And we'll start with our first one. And I'm not sure if I've got this name right. I think it's from Nisa. If I've said your name wrong, I apologize. And the question that Nisa poses is to our panelists: how do you believe that cancel culture, and in particular, they're asking about social media, is a contributor to acceptance and compassion in either a negative or positive way? I'll open that to any of you panelists who wants to jump in on that. Seth, Rabbi, do you want to tackle that one?
Sure. Yeah. So I think that I think it's a little complicated. I think that on the one hand, like I don't think that anyone has an obligation to kind of put themselves in harm's way, whether physically or emotionally, in order for the benefit of someone else's education. That I think that people have, I understand that people have to engage in some self-care and self-protection. And so I think that that's important to respect and to honor. At the same time, I think that when we cut ourselves off from people who disagree with us, that we are missing opportunities in a variety of different directions, including the opportunity for us to learn ourselves. And we're missing an opportunity for them to learn from us, and to be more understanding and supportive of people who carry the identities that we have. So I think I would lament kind of like distancing ourselves like solely because of disagreement, or because of like one kind of problem that we have with something another person has done or who they are. I would also agree with the Imam and say, like, there are certain phrases that like totally get under my skin. And one of those phrases is when people say, I have no boundaries, as a way of indicating like I'm really open and inclusive and welcoming, which I think is a great thing to be. But like, I think if someone has no boundaries and no contours, then we got a problem. That's probably not so great. I think it's a question of being conscious of one's own boundaries, and where they are and why we're setting them where we set them, whether it's us individually or as a community. And so I would agree with the question that there is the implicit question about there being a challenge in cancel culture to our learning and our cohesion as a society. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't have any boundaries and that there shouldn't be any consequences for particular actions or comments.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just a small apology on my part. I think going forward, I won't name who the question comes from. So if you're thinking of submitting a question, you can submit it and you will stay anonymous. Okay, Pastor Imam, either of you want to talk about, how about cancel culture and social media? How does
Yeah, I
it?
wanted to jump in on that just a little bit. I just like what Seth was saying there, and it's that balance, that equilibrium in regards to what is being said and what you're receiving into your spirit. You need to, I like what he said, absolutely. You need to hear some of the negative so that you'll be able to know how to correctively respond to it, because sometimes they're being negative because they don't have the proper education. So sometimes if we know what somebody's saying, take it with a grain of salt. Don't get upset. Take it and say, okay, now what can I do in this moment to help that person with that response to maybe see things a bit differently? And so if we're never hearing anything negative, then when something comes up, we won't not be in that place to properly be in a place where we can now resolve it. I always call it about resolving conflict. How can you resolve conflict properly? And so by getting that negative comment, and that's what happens with cancel culture, you'll get the negative and you get the positive. What can I do with that at the moment? In order for myself to be in a better position, or so I can now, when I hear that again, be able to respond in a proper way. So I just wanted to add that in there. Thank you.
Thank you. Imam.
Thank you. So just, a couple of things. First of all, I do appreciate what was said by Rabbi in terms of, boundaries and limits, and for, either from an individual perspective or even when we're looking at it as a faith tradition, there are limits and there are boundaries that are clearly defined. And so when it comes to social media, if we're not able to have civil conversations where it's okay if I disagree with you, it's okay if I have a different perspective, as long as it is not about inciting hatred or violence against others or violating people's basic human rights, then that is a conversation that should be allowed to take place, again, with those caveats, meaning that, that it's not about inciting hatred or calling violence towards others. Because if I'm not, I don't feel that I'm in a safe space where I can actually express civilly, cordially, my perspectives or viewpoints to be able to differ with others, then there's a missed opportunity to be able to see things from other people's perspectives. I mean, one of the reasons why I went into religious studies to do a bachelor's in religious studies is because I wanted to know how people understood their faith traditions from their perspectives, from the various, and to kind of explore that. And it's a lifelong exploration, and I continue to this day. That doesn't mean that I don't have, my own principles and my own boundaries and limitations and my identity. My identity is just that, it's my identity. And so if I feel that I'm going to be at risk to be able to even just have this conversation because of cancel culture, then that is actually taking away from this opportunity for growth for everyone, where we're able to see things from each other's perspectives, disagree, which is fine, we have our differences, but then we bring it back to that primary goal, which is having the basic human rights, dignity that are accorded to us as people. that it's okay. I can differ with you. I don't have to agree with everything that people say in terms of actions, in terms of beliefs. I mean, that's what gives us our diversity. But because even when we're talking about, dialogue, it's never about blurring the lines. It's about being able to have these conversations in a manner where I can come to understand other people's perspectives, even if I don't necessarily agree with them. But the point that we need to come together on is when it comes to harm, that nobody can ever accept the violation of people's basic human rights. That is a common goal for every single one of us, regardless of our various backgrounds. Cancel culture does not necessarily allow that to take place, because then people would be afraid of, well, I can't even speak my own opinion for fear that I'm going to be canceled. No, I mean, this is, I have to be able to speak based on my principles, as long as I am within limits and boundaries that do not violate the rights of other people.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to put something in the chat for everyone. It's a link on this very topic to a famous person named Megan Phelps Roper. And if you don't know her, Megan Phelps Roper was raised in the Westboro Baptist Church. The Westboro Baptist Church is famous for going to funerals and having signs saying God hates fags. Very anti-Semitic church. It's a church of hatred, if any of you have heard of it. It's famous or infamous, I guess you could say. And it's very pertinent to this question because Phelps Roper was raised in the church. Her father was the pastor, and she was raised from the time she was 6 to go around and condemn people loudly. And she got onto social media and condemned people all the time. Just to what this question was about. And what happened was, while some people on social media did the same thing as she did, they condemned her in the same way she condemned them, and it just fed itself. There were a few people who didn't. There were a few people on social media who just listened to her and tried to engage and ask respectful questions, and over time built up trust with her. And then eventually, actually, they had longer conversations, and then approached her at events and had more conversations. And eventually, that grace that they showed her when she was showing very little won her over, and she left the church. She eventually ended up actually marrying one of those kind of interlocutors. And there's a TED Talk, which I put in the chat. It's, it's the opposite of social media, right? Social media is so, here I am, and I'm going to damn those who disagree with me. And people who didn't do that changed her life. So anyways, I always find that an inspiring story. Okay, we have another question. And this question says to the panelists, as per your understanding of the scriptures, what is the ruling on the act of same-sex in your faith? And if it's prohibited, then how do you, or should you, reconcile that with an individual that comes to you who is engaging in such an act? Aman, would you like to go first?
Sure. So thank you for that question. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, within the Islamic faith tradition, when it comes to sexual norms, morality, ethics, they're clearly defined. And so specifically when it comes to sexuality, everything is prohibited except for what is specifically permitted, right? So the default is prohibition. So it's not only about same-sex acts, even acts between the opposite genders. When it comes to a sexual or an intimate nature, outside of the context of marriage, they're actually prohibited. So if an individual comes to me and whether they're engaged in same-sex acts or opposite-sex acts outside of the context of marriage, marriage is something that exists only between men and women within the Islamic faith tradition. And so when it comes to same-sex, that's not something that would be acknowledged or valid from an Islamic perspective. And that's something that we have to be clear about. And so if an individual comes and that they have that, there is nothing within, in my role, I'm not the one who defines these things. And individuals aren't the ones who define these types of things. So then it's a matter of, okay, how do I reconcile that? I can't say to a person who, for example, is having sexual intimacy outside the context of marriage, it's okay for you to do what you do. I can't say that because our faith draw those boundaries very clearly and that they're defined. So then it's a matter of a conversation. Okay, how is this going to contribute in terms of your relationship with your creator? Because it's not coming from me. This is about what the scripture says. This is about God in terms of how he wants us to manifest our surrender to him. And so to be able to engage a person in that type of conversation, I can never say to an individual, whether they're doing same-sex acts or opposite-sex acts, outside of marriage, I can never say to them, it's okay, it's permissible, it's something that Islam would allow. I can't do that. I'm not the one who defined that. It's clearly defined. It's prohibited. It's not allowed, right? So then it's a matter of, for that individual to be able to consider things within themselves when it comes to that journey, right? About their relationship with their creator, right? How is it that I can facilitate that type of conversation, but then leave the individual at the end of the day to make their own choices, and that they understand that those are, they're responsible for whatever choices that they do decide to make. That's them. I can't. I'm not here to impose, anyone's worldview or whatnot onto others. We can have a conversation about the limits and the boundaries and what's prohibited and what's allowed. That's defined very clearly, and we can have that conversation. But then at the end of the day, it's up to the individual in terms of what they choose to do, knowing in the greater context that we all go back to God. We all will, be asked about and have a responsibility before our Creator, first and foremost, in terms of these matters. And so then it's a matter of, okay, well, how do I work through that? Am I able to, I do have the feelings, for example, of same-sex attraction within myself. How do I reconcile that with my faith principles where I don't compromise them? Where it's based on, not doing those actions that would be deemed as displeasing or considered as sinful, right? So that's really how I would respond to that.
Thanks, Imam. And I respect your constant sort of respect for people to come to their own answers, and I appreciate your constant sort of bringing of that up. Pastor Thomas, how about you? How would you answer this question about the understanding within your tradition?
Similarly, it's same-sex marriage is not, or same-sex relations is not permitted. But then when they do come in, it's not about me. It's about them and their relationship with God. And so what I have to do is show them agape love. I'm not here to judge. I'm here to help you to maneuver through this the best way that I can. And so we pray together to see what are the next steps that we need to take so we can understand this and continue to show agape love. And that's what we have to do. I'm not here to judge, and we're not here. I'm not going to condemn you, damnation this and damnation that. No, that's not what it's about. It's about maneuvering, finding out what's the next steps here as you're going through this journey. And what support systems can I help to put in place for you as you're going through this journey? And so that's the thing that we have to do. We have to be able to now help individuals as they're going through this journey to help them to get through to the next level that they need to get to without doing condemnation, but through helping and building and giving them that support that they need to have. Because it is a place that we want to make sure that people have that safe space that they can come to me and say, you know what, the young people call me Pastor T. You know what, Pastor T, this is how I'm feeling. I'm getting these feelings. And I'm not going to say, I understand. I'm going to say, okay, that's great. Let's see what the Lord is saying about this. Let us pray. And we pray together so that they can get an understanding and I can get what I need to get as a leader to help them go through this. And then I'll say, you know what, I'm going to get you in contact with this group and that group. And let us go together and see what supports, because it's a togetherness that they need as they're going through this journey, not a condemnation, and helping them to get that relationship. Because remember that it is a relationship that each and every one of us have with God. My relationship is going to be different than Seth's relationship. Seth's relationship is going to be different than Brian's relationship. But the most important thing that on this journey that we call life, that we end up meeting our Creator, where He will say, well done, my good and faithful servant, come on in. But we need to get to that place without putting all of these blocks in each other's way, and remembering it's that relationship. And how do we get that relationship? Is praying and connecting with Him, so that He can tell us what we need to do on our next step. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Rabbi, could you give an answer to this question about your understanding of the scriptures and your own faith tradition?
Sure. Yeah, this is another one of those years where I'm going to give the general caveat of I'm speaking for me and not
Yeah.
for all Jews who have ever lived through all time in all places. So what I would say is just speaking for myself that given this range of different perspectives, I think that this is something that's probably held by a good chunk of kind of liberal Jewish communities, so conservative, reform, reconstructionist, probably most secular, is I think that there's like ideally kind of people are engaging in sexual relations in the context of like a loving, committed relationship. One in which they're able to see their partner as being kind of created in the image of God and able to honor that image and able to embrace the holiness that exists in their relationship. That for me, it's less about the identity of those two individuals involved and far more about kind of what is the nature of the relationship between them. So I would say that is kind of ideal. Again, speaking from a personal perspective, I think that like the key thing is like it is not possible to have that type of relationship if there's a degree of dishonesty that a person has with themselves or has with the other person. And I think that's like I know of people who have ultimately identified as gay, who have had same-sex attraction, who try and force themselves to perform in ways that are very much at odds with how they may feel and how they may ultimately identify. And I think that can be really painful for everyone involved, and can lead to a lot of hurt. And that I see as it's something that I have in the back of my mind. So that ideally, again, we talk about kind of these idea of loving, committed relationships where people, and again, that idea of honesty. And I think that if that isn't a component of how people are engaging with each other in terms of their physical relationship, in terms of their emotional relationship, their spiritual relationship, that strikes me as not being healthy for anyone.
Yeah, thanks, Rabbi. That theme of honesty has come up a couple of times in this conversation. There's another question. How do spaces like universities contribute to safe spaces for conversations like this, for intersectional topics like, religion and sexuality? Are they a better space, a good space to have these conversations compared to faith-based spaces like a mosque, a church, or a synagogue? I don't know which of you wants to attack. Pastor Sandy, do you want to address that?
Thank you so much. That's a very good question. And, it's sad to say, but it should be the faith-based organizations that should be a space where we could have these conversations. But unfortunately, it's not. We're not there yet. I mean, not a lot of pastors do it. I have those conversations openly. And I get that from the young people that, what, you don't hear that. And so we need to do more of that. As we're growing in the faith-based organizations, I have to speak about my community, to speak more and let people be able to have those conversations, have a seminar, invite people from the community to come and speak about this, because, the more that we can be more educated about different communities, about the two-spirited LGBTQIA community and what they're going through, the better it is that we can support one another and let them have these spaces. They want a space that they could come and have a meeting and talk. The churches should be open for that, for them to come in and have these groups and have these meetings. It should be also to make sure that we can also have those things at the universities, at the colleges. There should be places where each individual is able to go in and have these kind of conversations and dialogue as well. In churches, in the mosques, we need to do a better. It touches my heart when we don't have spaces where people can come and our spaces are not inclusive, where individuals can come and have these kind of conversations. And so having this type of discussion, my mind is already thinking about ideas so we can have these spaces, right? And come up with seminars and say, you know what, from 6 to 10 on a Tuesday night, the space is open for you to come in and have these conversations. So, I need to do a better job in that as well. And so I want to thank that person for that question. Um, because, I'm always trying to find ways to do better and to be better. And so I'm going to do what I can within this space to see what we can do to make sure that it is a place where we can reach out to individuals at the universities and colleges so we can do this. So I thank you so much for that question. And I will do better to make sure that we offer spaces within at least Spiritual Blessed Necklace Ministries here in London and in Toronto to do a better place. So I thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Pastor. Thank you very much. Either Rabbi or Imam, either of you want to address, can universities play a role to have these kinds of conversations?
So sure, I think that universities are excellent places to be able to have these conversations. And even when it comes to, because this is a challenging topic to discuss, that as I mentioned, there are a lot of nuances that are not often understood or overlooked or not perceived. And then at the same time, when we're talking about even within our own faith communities, I mean, I can speak from within the Muslim faith community rather than, speaking outside of it. But, there is a need to be able to have this conversation within our own community to be able to help provide these nuanced perspectives that it's not about reforming our faith tradition that is understood, from in terms of what is considered as deemed as normative, mainstream Islamic cultural, moral, sexual ethics. It's not about reforming it. It's not about changing it, but it's rather about understanding, okay, well, people who do exist within our community that are struggling with these issues, how is it that we're able to have a conversation with them that will help them to navigate the situation without compromising the basic principles and understandings and practices of the Islamic faith tradition, right? And that's an important conversation to have within our own communities. And, I can't speak for the Jewish or for the Christian community. And even, that there are diversities of churches that exist and whatnot. And I even, was mentioning just within the chat here that, when we're talking about Muslims and the diversity of Muslims that exist, there's a spectrum, right? But when we're talking about normative Islamic practice and understanding, that is something that is historically speaking, is quite clear when it comes to this issue of sexual ethics and moral. That is something that is actually quite clearly defined within the Quran, within the faith traditions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the Prophet Muhammad. But then it's a matter of, okay, well, how do we understand these things and then not misapply them? Because it's easy to misunderstand text. It's easy to misunderstand scripture and then misapply them, where you end up getting a result of violation of rights, where you end up getting a result of violation of people's basic dignity. It's not about the people as much as it is about understanding it's the actions. And that's what, when we're talking about God and what is dealt with in the Quran, it's about the actions that are deemed as problematic or prohibited or sinful or permitted, right? They go in both directions. But when it comes to the individual, well, we understand that we deal with human beings on a basis of compassion without compromise with our faith principles. And so that's an important conversation. It's a difficult conversation. It's a challenging conversation, but it's a needed conversation within our faith-based institutions so that people can get that better understanding. This is not about reforming our faith. This is not about compromising the basic moral ethics that do exist and are clearly defined. It is not about that. And if people think that it's about that, then it's a problem, because then that the conversation actually gets derailed and going in a direction that is not going to derive any benefit at the end of the day. And so it needs to be made clear. And that is what I can speak about just from within the Muslim faith tradition.
Thank you, Imam. And lastly, Rabbi Seth, let me turn to you. Do you think universities have a role to play here in facilitating these conversations?
Yeah, I would think so. I would hope so. I think that it requires a little bit of intentionality and making sure that we have professionals who are able to, to really foster these conversations. But in an ideal university setting, it's the idea of kind of exploring about growing as an individual, about growing intellectually, spiritually, emotionally. And I would hope that universities would embrace this opportunity. I find that often in secular spaces, there's a fear of engaging with religion because of how it might come out and what some of the consequences might be. I think that that's a shame. I think that there are wonderful ways for us to either learn about religion kind of intellectually, or for us to kind of explore our own sense of spirituality and what that can look like. And I think that to say that we're not going to do that because we're afraid of what some of the consequences or reactions might be, that's a loss for everyone. On top of that, I think that there is this need, especially for people who carry identities that may have had, I would say, adverse experiences in religious or spiritual settings, that trying to have these conversations solely in places of worship means that these may be individuals who aren't going to have access to these conversations. That if there's someone who says, I'm not going into a place of worship because of my past experiences, that means that they're not going to be able to access conversations like this one about kind of interfaith or multi-faith or plurifaith topics, or kind of how these issues might affect them. And so I think to the extent that we're able to carve out spaces in university settings that are not coercive and that offer opportunity for dialogue and for understanding, I think that that's a wonderful thing. And I would hope that universities would grab the opportunity to do that in a respectful and supportive way.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks so much, Rabbi. My own, as someone who's lived out, it seems probably more than half my life in universities, the best thing about them, I think, is when they open conversations that maybe you don't easily find elsewhere. It's the opposite of cancel culture, right? It's that respectful conversation. Folks, it is time for us to wrap up. And in so doing, I wanted to say there were a number of values that struck me that were consistent amongst our panelists today and consistent across time. And those were first, honesty, right? The ability for people to be honest about themselves and honest with one another. Second was respect, right? And how critical that is to creating the kind of safe spaces where all of us across differences can talk. And the third one, which I really liked, was grace. That when we get into these topics, and they are thorny topics, there is going to be differences of opinion, but if we can speak honestly, if we can respect those who we disagree with, and if we can always act with a bit of grace in the way we deal with one another, maybe that's not going to solve every problem, but maybe that gets us to a better place. And I thought our panelists have demonstrated all three of these traits today. And I just wanted to thank the three of you for your time, for your honesty, and for the respect you showed one another and our listeners today. So thank you all very much. And with that, I'll turn it over to Leslie.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for an excellent moderation as well. And thank you again. I want to also thank our panelists for entering this space with us, and all the attendees. Thank you. I hope everyone got to take away something. And thank you again. And hopefully this opens the door for more conversations. So thank you again, everyone.